quarter. We've got Alan here from The Glue, who's presenting on cyber risk. Throughout the webinar, you will be muted, so if you have any questions, please feel free to send them through. As many questions as you have, now is a great chance to have Alan speak to your specific queries, but just use the question panel on your dashboard, which should be on the right-hand side of your screen, to ask any questions. We'll address some of them throughout the presentation if it's relevant, and otherwise we'll address all questions at the end. So I'll hand over now to Alan. Thank you.
Thanks for the introduction, Dean, and welcome everyone to our presentation today, which is on understanding cyber risk. I just wanted to give you a quick background around who I am, the company that I'm from, and what we do at both the Glue and how we work. So from that perspective, I'll just give you a quick intro. So the Glue delivers technology and security services to a range of regulated and high-risk clients, predominantly in the financial services and healthcare sector. Our team work on a range of projects that span design and implementation of security strategy through to remediation of compromised systems after major data breaches. We also work on a range of projects with different clients to prevent those breaches from happening in the first place. So a little bit about me. I founded the Glue back in 2016 with a really close friend of mine. We've gone from strength to strength, but my passion has always been for technology and working with businesses to establish really great outcomes. I'm also the chairperson for 3 not-for-profits across different sectors of the industry, both with an organisation called Every Little Bit Helps, and also working with some other not-for-profits in industry services. So my goal has always been to give a little bit back. I'm the father of 2 kids, aged 9 and 12. And both of those kids are very challenging. So Claire, my 9-year-old, actually attends primary school, and my son Shannon has just started high school this year. So basically the kids obviously present an interesting challenge, and we'll touch on that as we move through the presentation and we go forward. But at heart, I'm a passionate and practical technologist. So my goal there is to always spend some time working with our customers and people in industry and families that I come into contact with through my roles in the schools that my kids attend to address a lot of the risks that quite often get overlooked for individuals and also for the organizations that we work with. So I'll jump into the agenda today, and I want to run you through a couple of different items. So we're going to look firstly at some of the new and current trending issues, some recurring themes that we see in data breaches and security and cyber risk that we come across on a daily basis, weekly basis, and sometimes monthly basis. I want to talk a little bit about your cyber risks, both as an individual, but also as a family. And I think that's probably where we'll get a lot of questions, and a lot of people will want to know a little bit more about the sort of strategies I get into with my kids and how we manage cyber risk in our family. And then I want to talk about those strategies and how you can manage a risk, knowing the situations that you face every day, looking at how you can take security just a little bit more seriously, and talking a little bit about communication and the resources and tools that are available to us as parents and individuals to make sure we maintain an appropriate level of safety in what we're doing every day. So with that in mind, I'd like to jump over to the cyber update. So as a starting point, I want to look at a couple of the key facts and figures, and we're really lucky in Australia that we have some great legislation that was implemented a couple of years ago now. It's managed by the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner. They're a federal government department, and basically any business of certain size, type and form that manages personally identifiable information has now got a legal responsibility to report any mandatory data breach. So basically what that means is for these businesses, if they do something wrong or they're compromised as a result of a malicious attack, their obligation is to report that to the government so that we get a much better picture of what's happening in industry, how many people are being affected, and it adds a layer of transparency to the data that you're actually holding as a company, but it also forces companies to be a bit more accountable and responsible for the information they're holding that's yours, and making sure they're taking what we call reasonable steps to secure that data and make sure that malicious actors and general human error doesn't cause that data to be released into the wild. So interestingly, in the 3 months to June 2019, and this is a fairly static number now, in the 245 to 250 range. So in 3 months, we had 245 breaches that were reported to the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner. So that's just companies in Australia reporting to the Australian government that they've had a breach. And interestingly, that doesn't include every single breach. So if you meet a minimum standard of requirements, which is a low impact, and you were able to take remediation, you don't necessarily have to report. So there's a whole set of criteria that we have to apply in that space. So this is a very small subset of what actually has happened in Australia through the course of 3 months. And of those breaches, and this is the really interesting statistic for us, 62% of those breaches were malicious. So that means that someone that was not known to the company or was known to the company but was not taking appropriate steps has gone in and actually accessed data that they shouldn't have had access to, and that's become publicly available. 34% were due to human error. So that's around process and process issues. So I recall an incident a few years back now where a medical records provider left them out a whole bunch of medical records out on the side of the street when they were relocating offices, and the removalist forgot to pick them up. So that would be an example of when information was released into the public, not even necessarily from something that they had control over. They had a process in place, but it wasn't managed appropriately, and that information was released. But the critical statistic for us is out of those 245 breaches, 31% involved identity information. So that's information that could lead to someone being able to identify you as an individual and potentially compromise your identity. Now that's really serious, because if you're in a situation where someone has your identity information, they can go out, they can apply for credit, they can purport to be you, they can enter into contracts. And whilst we should have good systems and processes to protect you, that's one of the critical areas where I believe Australian businesses need to take this a little bit more seriously and ensure that when it comes to identity information, we have really, really strong controls to prevent those potential risks occurring to individuals. So some breaches in the news, and we update these statistics quite regularly. I picked some that have happened in the last few months. We had Canva, who's a graphic design online company that's bought up a few other companies. They're based here in Australia. They had a compromise of their systems, and 139 million user accounts were accessible in the general to the general public. That included email addresses, and of those, a lot of them were Google email addresses, hashed passwords, and I'll touch on passwords a little bit later on in the presentation. But basically it meant that all of this information was released into the public. Back in June, Westpac, who everybody would know, was implementing new technology with PayID as part of the new payments platform that all the banks are working on, which allowed someone to search in real time and match bank account numbers, mobile numbers, and names, and collect a whole bunch of information out of their payments platform because it didn't put appropriate controls around that matching process under the new payments platform. So 100,000 account details were available to the general public. Very, very serious in terms of identity information and matching there, but also an area where you see that you need to put a bit more focus on new technology and how you're managing that risk and assessing that risk as you develop new platforms. And as a large corporation like Westpac, I really think we should have been, we should expect more from them to understand the potential impact of new technology as they release it. An interesting one for us in August was the Cam Scanner app. Now, this is a scenario where for almost 10 years, Cam Scanner has been available on the Google Play Store and Apple App Store. It's a little app that allows you to use your camera to take a photo and convert that photo to PDF for a document for storage. Very widely used, a free app and funded by, for all intents and purposes, advertising within the app. And basically what happened is, inside the code set for that app, an advertiser was compromised, and so the code that they pulled into all of their builds for all of their apps was actually infected with malware. And so then malware became, when the next update was pushed through Google Play and Apple App Store, it went out to all of the mobile devices that had that app installed and potentially compromised many hundreds of thousands of users that for 10 years had used a very secure app. So it's interesting how development cycles in apps and the need to review those third-party code sets that a lot of apps these days use needs to be built into a process and has the potential from a safe app to compromise a device that you operate, even though you looked at it 3 years ago and it was fine. And of the most current example is September this year, Facebook announced that 419 million of their accounts had been potentially released publicly available on a server on the internet. They've obviously closed that gap now, but the information that was available was particularly around user profiles, email addresses, and that sort of thing. So the scale of these data breaches and losses of these major corporations is actually quite scary. But we'll touch on why in the next slide, the impact of those data breaches and how they'll affect you as an individual and why you need to be aware of what's happening and the platforms that you're using and how they potentially impact you. So we'll jump across to the next slide and we'll unpack a little bit about the impact of data breaches. So really, data breaches offer a rich source of information that allow these third parties, malicious third parties, to further compromise your identity and security. So in a lot of cases, these data breaches contain passwords if they weren't appropriately stored on the servers of the company that was breached. It's extremely common for email addresses to be used as a unique identifier in these platforms. So typically what will happen is if a compromise does occur, the first thing that gets released into the wild is the email, the second potentially is the password, and then the third is all of the other information about you as an individual that is stored by that platform. But here's the interesting part about your passwords. If you've been compromised more than once on occasion, what will happen is if that password that you've used on one site, you've reused it somewhere else, these malicious actors are getting really clever. And what they do is they go and buy 2 or 3 data sets, and then they combine those data sets and they match your email address against your commonly used passwords they've collected from all of the data sets. And then they'll take those and they'll go, okay, let's pick the top 10 platforms that we know that people use, and it might be Office 365, it might be Dropbox, it might be Facebook, Gmail, all of those places, and then they will test in an automated way your email address and your passwords against all of those major websites, so that way they can identify potentially accounts that they could log into and then use those to their own benefit to potentially extort money. They could change your password. They could use that to host further malicious content they want to share with your trusted network. There's a whole range of ways that they can capitalize on those passwords that they've then collected through these data breaches. And here's a really key item for us. When we talk about the volume of data and accounts that are available in the wild as it stands today. So we run some scans occasionally for clients, particularly high-risk clients, and we look at the email set that they've got within their businesses, but also personally. And then we pull out through a database service that we've got that matches all of those credentials that are available on the dark web, a report on the passwords that they've got that are freely available, and then we give them to the end users and we say, hey, are you using any of these passwords right now? You would be surprised the number of yeses we get from that process. And it says to us there really needs to be a focus around how you manage your passwords, how you select your passwords, how you separate them on a platform by platform basis. And what we see is that typically we need a tool set to help us with that, because there's no easy way of remembering passwords. It's much easier to have a service to do that for you, and then make sure that that service that's collecting all of those passwords, individualizing them for you, is actually doing the work. Another interesting part about these data breaches is how they lead to identity theft. And we've seen case upon case upon case where information that was leaked, and often clients of ours will come to us for advice in this space. How did they get to the point where they could compromise my identity? Where was this information available? Where was it leaked from? What options do I have to go and try and track this down and put a stop to it? Unfortunately, often it's too late at that point. There's not really a lot we can do. We can talk to credit providers and we can put blocks on credit files, and a lot of the state governments can issue new driver's license numbers to address a lot of these things, except if you're in Western Australia. But there's a lot of strategies you can implement, but our view in this space is let's avoid that by not getting to that point. And we'll talk about those risks when we get to the next slide. And particularly interesting to us is this concept of spear phishing. So a lot of people would be familiar with the random emails that you get into your inbox that look like they come from Qantas or Office 365 or Microsoft or Google, and quite often they're a pretty bad replication of what you would expect in an email that you get from one of these major vendors. But sometimes they're actually getting pretty good, and these guys are constantly evolving their ability to do that. But what they're now starting to do is take this information that's available to them, that they've purchased at a very low cost on the dark web, and then become very targeted in how they approach individuals. So they can customize down to the nth degree a template email to come to you that incorporates things like your date of birth or your home address. If they've got your driver's license number, they might choose to use that piece of individual information, but they can craft these emails in such a way that because they've got so much information, you're much more likely to interact with that email and achieve the outcome that those malicious actors are looking to achieve, which is to potentially compromise your computer, your phone, or another device that you're operating, and give them access to even more information. So spear phishing is all about this very targeted, very individualized approach to attack high-value targets, and eventually convert it to money, because that's what all of this is about. The information that we have is that this is now a multi-billion-dollar industry globally. You're getting attempts to extort you via telephone. You're getting attempts to extort you via email. We've seen crypto locker where whole computers are locked and you don't have access to your data and they want to be paid in Bitcoin. But we've now got to a point, and this is the commercialization of extortion in the global environment, to the point where these organizations that are compromising systems are actually now requesting you to call their customer service teams that they've established to help you with your problems. Conscious of time, I'm going to jump along to the individual risks and touch on that pretty quickly, and then we'll roll over onto the family bit, which I'm sure where everybody really wants us to spend our time. So the things that I'd like to talk to you about here really is about types of things you need to be considering that could potentially be a point of entry for your cyber issues. So we're talking about computers and the need to keep them updated. So your Windows updates, your Apple updates, your phone updates, the stuff coming from Google as Android updates. Those are really important things. These vendors are not just sitting there sending out updates because they want to or make your life difficult. Typically, they're addressing potential issues in their operating systems that allow these people to get into your systems and compromise you. So follow the update cycle, do it quickly, do it often, do it every month, make sure that you've got those devices up to date. In terms of phones, and this is a piece of advice we give to all of our clients, pick a major reputable vendor. there's only really 3 or 4 of them. So you've got Apple, you've got Samsung, you've got, I know Oppo is new in the market, and you've got Huawei. Look, in that space, those are the types of companies that are spending the money updating their operating systems and patching these issues as they happen. The cheap $39 handset down the road, not so much. Update your apps, make sure that you're doing that regularly. Delete apps that you don't need, because they potentially, if there's this app that's sitting on a computer, you haven't used it for 10 years, they're the apps that typically are the ones being compromised. They're not updated, they're no longer supported. So delete them, uninstall them, remove them if you no longer need them. That's a really important approach. Look at your home networks and how you're managing those. Make sure that you're obviously securing your Wi-Fi with a password. Changing that password every 3 to 6 months is a good idea. And making sure that the router that you've got isn't just a cheap router that you receive from your ISP. Make sure you've got one with a built-in firewall and security functionality. We're talking about email and managing your passwords and how you manage that. I'll touch on that when we get to the family risks piece. Knowing where your USB flash drives are and what's on them. And this is a really interesting topic a lot of people don't think about. The second that you put that USB in your handbag or your briefcase on your way to work, and your briefcase goes missing, all of that data is freely accessible to whoever plugs it in. You can get encrypted USBs, there's a whole range of things you can do, but put the limited amount of information necessary on those devices, know where they are at all times, and make sure that you're not just carrying them around for the sake of carrying them around, because they're a rich source of information if they get into the wild. Looking at file sharing and file storage, making sure that we know where it is, who's operating it, where our data is hosted, and making sure we're securing that with multiple layers of authentication. If you're putting sensitive information in there, like photos of your passport, driver's license that you're sharing out to third parties, and then talking about your social media and how you interact, what privacy settings you're using and how that's working. So that's really important. But I'd like to jump over to family risks, because I think there's some stories here that I can share with you that really are quite interesting and important to manage. So the first thing is computers, phones and apps. It's much like I said, at an individual level, we should be managing those at work, we should be managing them at home. But when we're talking about family risks with computers, phones and apps, I'm talking about how do we manage the content that's on those devices and what that gives those individual children in our families access to. And I know that there's a range of filtering products available. I know Norton Family comes with their security product. There's a whole bunch of different filters you can do, but think about how you're filtering. So are you filtering at the home network level? Are you filtering on the mobile device that has access to the internet directly over the cellular network? And how are you managing that? But more importantly, how are you managing your children's interaction with those devices and how are you supervising it? And how does that track through the age as they get older? So ultimately, you're at a situation, and I talk, there's a lot about nudes and sexting and pornography in our presentations, but ultimately, I can tell you as a parent of a 12-year-old who came home and spoke to me 3 weeks ago about a situation he'd had on the bus on the way to school, where the year 11s were watching Pornhub on a device on the bus on the way to school. He straight away came home and had a chat with me about it. And he goes, "Dad, I just wanted to understand, we were watching Pornhub. I know I'm not supposed to do that. I understand that it's not real, and I understand we've had a lot of chats in the past about what we see online and what's appropriate and what's not. I wanted to let you know that it happened. My way of dealing with it was to move seats and go to a different part of the bus. I don't really understand why it was there in the first place, but he could manage that situation because we'd equipped him with the skills to deal with it as it came up. And I think when they get into that high school age, we have to understand that no matter what we do as parents, the amount of filtering we put in place, we really need to be building those strong relationships with them and having communication with them so that when these issues come up, they're actually equipped to deal with them and to have an appropriate conversation, an age-appropriate conversation with you, because they are going to come across it at some point. And that's the reality of our current online connected world, is that we can't be everywhere with them 100% of the time. We have to equip them with the skills to do that. So similarly in the nudes and sexting piece, I think that's where we want to get them to be asking questions. If I take this photo and I send it to my boyfriend or girlfriend or whoever it is, they're going to have that. who's going to see it, what's the audience, how am I going to protect myself, and would I be happy for that to turn up on the national news in the evening, or would I have a problem with that? Am I breaching any laws? And there are all the laws in that space around how we address those things. So I think it's important that we're actually having those open channels of communication with them. I think the other one that's really interesting for us is around online gaming. And I know all of our kids have Xbox and PS4, and they're playing Fortnite, not so much anymore, but they're having these chats online with randoms that they're playing against. Now, this is where we get really concerned, because there's an opportunity there for your children to be engaging with kids they don't know, or potentially adults they don't know. And they never know who's going to be on the other end of that microphone and who they're talking to. So it's really important for us that you take two steps here. One is, if they're younger kids, ditch the headset. There's no need for them to be talking to these people online. They can play without it. If we're getting to the age where they're starting to get teenagers and they are talking to their mates and they have a defined group of people they're playing with, understand, set some boundaries around that, about who are we talking to, are we only talking to people we know, and set the rule that if someone joins that game that you don't know, you don't talk to them, you don't interact with them, and you take the headset off and keep playing without it. I think that's particularly important approach, and understanding where that comes from. In the grooming and unwanted contact space, there's a lot of information available online, but from our perspective, we've seen a lot of situations in Australia where this has come up, and it's getting more prevalent. There are ways to address that with your local police and with the Federal Police and the E-Safety Commissioner, but ultimately it's about having that open channel of communication, understanding that those relationships change very quickly. These people that are grooming kids are very much experts in their field, and we want to be in a situation where your kids understand that the person on the other end that has a cute picture of a guy their age or a girl their age that they're talking to may not actually look like that on the other end. And it's the open door policy. If you're going to be having video chats on FaceTime with friends or new people that you've met online, you're doing that in a way that it's open and transparent, that your parents know about it and you're engaging in an appropriate way. And importantly for me, understanding your privacy settings and social media. So I know we're all using TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and all of these different platforms. And as adults, we probably understand Facebook, Instagram to an extent, but it's understanding all of these new and open channels in other apps that these kids are using now, and understanding how they're interfacing with those, who's seeing the content, understanding what sort of content's being posted. And the way we work with our kids in that space is actually making sure that if they're going to post something online, let's have a chat about what you're going to post. Show me what you've done. That's an amazing video you've created. That's really cool. Let's put that one up and make sure that it's protected appropriately so only your friends can see it. Or actually, guys, I think, yeah, no, we don't really like that video for these reasons. Why don't we have another crack at editing it together on the computer and build that strong relationship to work together with them on technology so that they can actually start to develop a really nice set of skills to handle these situations as they come up. And look, I know that there's no one size fits all. We're all really busy people. Most of us work during the day. We have limited time to be doing these sorts of things, but it's all about that strength of communication and building their skills as they grow older to make sure that they're able to handle these online challenges as they come up. And understanding, and I guess this is probably where I want to come to the password piece, managing your passwords is like the #1 golden rule for us. Separate password for every platform. Put it in a password vault like 1Password, LastPass, Dashlane. There's a whole bunch of them out there online that are actually very reputable and reliable. And then use their app to sign into all of these platforms, whether you do it using a browser plugin, the application on your computer, an app on your phone. It really does start to get much easier once you get into it and it's all done. But it really does limit the ability of these data breaches to impact you as an individual, because they can't then take that information and apply it to other platforms where you're reusing your passwords. So from my perspective, I guess the real message here is twofold. One, let's talk about communication with our kids, make sure that we're actually engaging with them in an appropriate way, building their skills to enter these online worlds. putting some boundaries around it, some time around it. One of the really great resources that we like in our family is to take the kids to esafety.gov.au. There's an area for kids, there's an area for parents. And the one for parents, and this is the one that I talk to everybody about, is taming technology, because there is so much opportunity to restrict apps, have family sharing. It doesn't matter which platform you've got, whether you've got Android with Google Play, iOS and App Store, even your Microsoft PCs has a family option now. So from that perspective, we really encourage people to understand exactly what's going on with their technology. And if they don't know, ask the question, because I think building a strong relationship with someone you know that has a technical skill set can help you together as a group of parents start to address it and make sure that all of these issues are resolved. There's a whole bunch of really great resources and tools, so I might jump over to the next slide and talk to you briefly about those. So I've put up there 1Password. That's my favorite password management tool. 1password.com. Before you sign up, if you want a 3-month free trial, let me know. My details are at the end of the presentation. I'm happy to send you across a link to get that free trial so you can test it out and see how it works. ID Care. Now, if you do get to a situation where you feel like you have been compromised, there's a whole bunch of counsellors available to you. There's a 1300 number. They're really great at walking people through what to do in the circumstances of a breach, either as an individual or if you're operating a business and you have a data breach and you want to help your customers that are affected, they have ability to help you with that too. Kids' passwords, and this was an interesting one for us. Clients that we work with often laugh. There's a really great password generation tool for kids. It's available at dinopass.com. Basically, you can hit a button. It's going to give you a 2-word password with a couple of numbers. It's really easy and quite funny sometimes to see the passwords that generates. It's a great conversation to be having and a good way to introduce kids to good password hygiene. We use it occasionally internally as a bit of a demo tool, but there's some great options there. You can pick a simple password for kids, or even if you have trouble remembering passwords, jump on there. There's actually a strong password button as well. You'll be able to remember their passwords because of the weird way they do them. Taming technology we've talked about. Norton Family, go and have a look. It doesn't suit everybody, but if you're thinking about your antivirus for your computers, when you buy their antivirus product, they give you this free solution for web filtering across devices. So it works on Android, it works on iOS, it works on your PCs and MacBooks. So definitely something worth looking at. The one thing I haven't talked too much about is multi-factor authentication. And so a lot of you would be familiar with the whole enter my email address, enter my password, and then get a prompt for a 6-digit rotating code or an 8-digit rotating code, or you get a code via SMS. If you have that option to set up a multi-factor authentication piece with these platforms you're using, like Dropbox, you can do it, Office, you can do it. I can't think of a major platform that doesn't have it available as an option now. Check out YubiKey. So YubiKey is a hardware version of that. So you don't have to constantly go back and get those codes. It's built in. You can plug it into your mobile device. You can plug it into your computer. You just literally tap and it will log into the devices for you. So then you're basically taking away the whole need for passwords and remembering usernames and everything else. The system is going to do that for you. It's available at trustpanda.com.au. Big asterisk there. The Glue actually owns TrustPanda, and we do sell those YubiKeys, but we're the only one in Australia that have them in stock. It's a really popular product globally. Even Google use it internally for their staff now for all of their logins. Really popular, but have a look at YubiKey. It's a great option. Now, and this is the big one for me, part of my engagement with people and part of my agreement to come here today and talk to you guys was that I'll make myself available for questions. So our website is there, theglue.com.au. We're business focused, but I encourage you all to look me up on LinkedIn, have a look at our website, send us contact detail. If you have questions, by all means, send them through our website contact form, send them to me by direct email, hit me up on LinkedIn. I don't mind how you do it. I'm absolutely happy to take the time and spend some effort and actually give you answers to questions that you may have as we go along. And then the final one, which we like to talk about, is the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner. They're publishing quarterly reports. They tell you how many breaches, they tell you who they were, how it was affected, the sort of risk that's associated with them. keep yourself abreast of that information and understand where those resources are, because they are going to inform you as you go forward, and there's plenty of options there to get further information around the safety and the data breach piece and the sort of steps we should be taking to secure our data. I think I've gone a little bit over time for our 11 to 11:30, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to take those now and address them. If they're using the question panel, I think I'll see them shortly in my chat list.